we have a guest with the best background so far on the Geospatial Index. This is Will Cadell from SparkGeo. Will, could you let us know the SparkGeo elevator pitch and the niche that you are dominating?
Sure. Yeah, thanks very much, Will. Thanks for having me on. The elevator pitch is that we put maps on the internet. That's what we started doing back in 2010. And largely we do the same thing now. There's just more of us, and we could do it for more organizations. We typically sit in the sort of commercial space, so we're less government oriented. Although that's not quite as true now as it was maybe a year ago. But in general terms, we point more at where geospatial hits the commercial stroke enterprise area. And in doing so, we talk to a lot of kind of big ag organizations or insurance or big tech. And typically technology was our main niche. And we would provide custom geospatial software development into those areas. So as a result of that, we get to sort of engage with lots of different organizations who are using geospatial. And we sort of listen hard and try and figure out where geospatial is going to be used in the next few years, so we can be addressing those markets proactively, if you like. So we're a collection of software engineers, geospatial data scientists, cloud people, and sort of what you might call like consultants providing advice. And so we provide advice and sort of back it up with an ability to execute on data and code all around geospatial. So we're pretty niche-y in that whole geospatial piece. We used to do a ton of work in what we would call like device land, and around social networks. Now we're doing a lot more work around Earth observation and turning pixels into products. So that's actually my background. Is I have a master's in remote sensing. So seeing this kind of Earth, this Earth observation reinvention was really interesting for me. So we've been building remote sensing platforms and such for the last sort of 5 years. And because we've never owned any servers of our own, we've become pretty good at sort of cloud-centric Earth observation applications and platforms. So that's a long elevator pitch, but it's we don't just do one thing, if you like.
Yep, sure. All right, so I like this because I've already been distracted from the agenda I was proposing for this chat, but only because I've got a bit of a provocative topic here. I hear that John Deere could be classified as a geospatial company in a way, and this relates to agriculture, one of the markets you said you were serving. Have you got any comments on whether, for example, I should have John Deere in the Geospatial Index?
Well, I think in the same way that you could argue any automotive company is geospatial by nature, based on the devices, the smart devices that we now find on vehicles, that, for that reason, John Deere should be, I think, a geospatial company. Because there are, and I'll predicate this by saying that we've never done any work with John Deere. So I actually have absolutely no idea of the intricacies of the organization, but I would be deeply surprised if they didn't have a platform, if they weren't collecting absolutely tons of GPS-based device data and other bits of information around how their various different vehicles perform. So with that in mind, in the same way that Toyota or BMW or any other automotive manufacturer is also collecting absolutely screeds of GPS data. John Deere probably should be in your index in some manner, I would expect.
Good. I'm glad you've said that, because they are.
They are. Yeah.
There's some news about them actually having their own satellite constellation, which seems, like to an outside observer, a good old, simple tractor company going to the level of having satellites, to me, is a great illustration of how broad our geospatial industry is, how deeply embedded we are in how the world works.
Yeah. I think that's a really interesting observation, because I mean, you can argue it a couple of ways. You could say, hey, John Deere, are they imagining themselves as a precision agriculture company? In which case, yeah, satellites make perfect sense. And it's kind of an extension on from, like the traditional view of John Deere being, oh, we build tractors, and maybe they're reimagining themselves and saying, no, we build technology which supports agriculture. So it's a little bit more general, and it's interesting because it starts to address the notion of jobs to be done, as opposed to just just sort of focusing in on a technology. So it kind of it's conceivably a way of avoiding disruption in some manner, by genericizing their value proposition through technology. It's kind of an interesting play, I think.
Yeah. So we've talked about remote sensing a bit. You said you've got a academic background in remote sensing. It's something that seemed to happen during COVID or around 2021, around about then. There were a whole bunch of SPACs, or special purpose acquisition companies, I think is what the acronym means, where all of these Earth observation companies went public. But 2 or 3 years later, a lot of them are down at least 50%. Some of the best ones like Planet or Spire, Black Sky, some of those are even down 80%. So, and then I've seen, for example, even from yourself, there was a post you made on Substack about proposals for, or I guess thinking about how you could consolidate some of these players as a result of maybe some interest coming out of the market. So what are your thoughts about this bloodbath that's happening?
It's such an interesting time in geospatial. It's I like, it's the best of times, it's the worst of times. It's really interesting. So I take a couple of steps back, and let's have a think about what the EO market really is. For the longest time, the Earth observation market has been who can sell to the U.S. defense sector. So you had the likes of sort of GeoEye, space imaging, and a digital globe, all got mashed up, basically ending up with Maxar being the end result of that. As we know, Maxar last year was sort of acquired by, or is on the docket to be acquired by Advent. I think that's actually, we must be quite close to that actually being triggered now. I can't
Advent.
Is it not Advent?
I don't know. I've never heard of it. I feel like I should take notes.
Private equity company.
Oh no,
so I think,
not private equity.
Well, hey, it's Maxar is a wonderful company. They've done incredibly well. They've been through some sort of massive changes in the last 3 years, what with sort of various different machinations. NDA's been involved, NDA got pushed out, blah, 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 whatever. Maxar's in this really interesting spot, but because they really own that central EOCL contract, electro-optical commercial license.
Sounds like it should be licensed.
Anyway, it's like basically an enormous contract from National Reconnaissance Office for the provision of commercial imagery to the U.S. government. They've got a big portion of that. The other portions were doled out to Black Sky and Planet. And what's interesting is that you have these portions doled out, and Planet and Black Sky have taken that. But both of those organizations were subject, as you said, to the sort of SPAC situation. Most of those SPACs went in at about $10. They're now sub 5, to your point. So what's going on? And I think what's going on is that there's been this market gap. There's an unsettled market in the space between pixels and people. Like, in general, we expected that the measurement of landscape changes would be of value. And I think the problem is that we have not been able to make that work in various markets. So there is value in the measurements of landscape change around agriculture. So to our friends in John Deere launching satellites, they have this need or this observation that understanding how plants grow and measuring that and then forecasting that has great deal of value. There is value there because there is value in the plant growing and subsequent harvesting and subsequent sale of that harvest. Like, people got to eat, and understanding the amount of food that we have, the amount of food that we have globally, the amount of food we have locally, and distribution of that food is a really useful thing. So, and if we can grow more food from a smaller plot of land, that's a great thing. So there's intrinsic value in that measurement from space. And we've actually known that for a long time. If you look at any kind of pitch decks from hyperspectral sensors that are being launched at the moment, it's all about precision agriculture. So how can we make this better? Beyond that, you enter like insurance land, and there's some pretty good reasons there, but we're getting into a place where the organizations who are consuming that data are getting less and less familiar with the data products being sold. So insurance guy doesn't want an image.
I'm sorry, could you say that again? Who is becoming less and less familiar?
The end consumer, the insurance individual, the actuary, whoever that might be, the person making an assessment on risk, is becoming less and less familiar with the data products being sold by the imagery companies. So what's happened is that the final consumer of the product is further and further away from understanding the raw product that we use to measure landscape change. And that broadening gap becomes increasingly problematic, because you need technology, you need software to be able to say, oh, that pixel is that color, which means, Mr. Insurance guy, this is your increase or decrease in risk, which means you need to change your model in this manner. So like there's pieces of that value chain which simply don't exist. There are tools which don't exist yet. So there's an assessment that data collection from the satellites is useful, but we have not built the technology to make it useful for that individual.
Are you saying that we need to have new analytics specific to the insurance industry that convert pixel values or intensity values into meaning? We need new
analytics. Yeah, we need new analytics for every single vertical.
Okay,
not just in. So the gap is in this interpretation of pixels. So I've been talking for a while that actually pixels in themselves are a bit of a problem. Like, selling a pixel is selling a problem for someone to solve.
Sure.
Yeah. So it's like, if I said to you, I've got a computer for you, it's the best computer in the world.
Yeah.
But it only shows you assembly language. So you're gonna have to figure out the next piece. You'll be like, this is useless. I have no use for this. It might be the fastest computer on the planet, but I cannot use this computer because all it tells me is a language I don't understand.
I mean,
that's exactly where we are in remote sensing.
Sure. And I'm not an expert at all in insurance, but one thing that springs to mind that's kind of vaguely topical given climate change is coastal erosion. And I suppose there might be a bunch of especially rich people who have coastal real estate who might be interested in how their insurance premiums might increase as time goes by.
Yeah, or and the insurance companies themselves might be interested to know whether something should be completely uninsurable. Like, do we actually want to insure this property at all? Are we going to lose our shirts here? And then the other neat thing about remote sensing is that you could have a distributed portfolio. So you could have, properties sprinkled across North America or sprinkled across the planet for that matter. and you can still look at the relevant landscape changes around each property, because satellites are in the sky, they can look anywhere. So there's this natural scalability to satellite remote sensing, which is super useful. But again, if you can't read that image in a meaningful way, or if it, I mean, you look at an image, oh, that looks nice, that's great, but what does it tell me? Then it's a problem. So if you think about the typical defense application, the typical government application, you look at an image, you see where things are happening, you see where the baddies are, that's the product. That's it. Like, it's like, oh, that's where the tanks are, that's where the people are, I see what's happening, I understand, that's a great product, really useful to me. Yeah. For insurance person, it's like, actually, I need a stack of these images, and I need to look at slices of what's happened over the last 10 years to give me an idea.
Yeah.
And then I need someone to give me a report
and you need
about
statistics.
that change. And you need to, like, you actually want a number or a graph or something else. The image itself is part of the equation,
okay,
but it is not the product. So it's really interesting.
So what I'm getting from this is that with Spire and Black Sky being down 80% since SPAC, really what these SPACs should have been was a bunch of geospatial analytics entrepreneurs with analytics firms using these as raw materials to answer questions for, as you said, the insurance vertical, I don't know, the agriculture vertical.
Yeah, like
that might have gained the interested investors more.
Well, I think the promise of measuring climate change is enormous. So that's where the initial stock prices came from. If you can measure climate change in a meaningful way, and there's a market for that. So if the SEC and the FCA decide to regulate ESG filings in a real manner, and they're going to come down hard on greenwashing, oh my word. Like, what other tool are you going to use other than, Earth observation technology and then geospatial technology to figure that stuff out? There isn't really a meaningful tool. And then you're going to have tools for filing. You're going to have tools for auditing. So like, all that's going to be geospatial. It really kind of has to be, because otherwise, how can you robustly measure or robustly demonstrate an impact in an environment?
I haven't looked into them a heck of a lot myself. I should. I get the impression that some of them have, well, okay, they're easy to sell, I feel, and they inspire especially maybe less sophisticated investors with their very impressive videos about all of their amazing constellations, and you get terms like small sats and CubeSats, and suddenly everybody it just focuses on the hardware. But the impression I'm getting is actually the way to generate a consistent return and maybe to stand out is more the analytics, the algorithms, and the stuff that does the heavy lifting, but is harder to inspire people with because it's not something floating around in space.
Oh yeah. I think that's absolutely true. So I think the notion of launching satellites into space is amazing. And you know what? In no uncertain terms, so I want to give you the impression that I don't think there's good value in doing so. I just think the market is really unstructured right now. So by that, I mean, there's no dominant design around how a financial analyst would engage with a massive catalog of imagery to create analytic value. Like, that is a tool that is not being built, or that is a tool that is not understood by that financial community. There could be two different things happening there. Nevertheless, there is no dominant design for that kind of technology. I think there will be at some point. We'll understand how to parse massive amounts of data, and maybe it's going to be like a Maps GPT thing, and like, hey computer, tell me about landscape change in this zip code for the last 10 years, and Maps GPT will tell us that there's been an increase, a 10% increase in one landscape use over another landscape use. Maybe that's a realistic thing. And maybe that is actually the interface that we need.
Okay, yeah, I feel like we're designing a startup in real time here.
Oh yeah,
okay.
well,
So
you know, our industry should be having these discussions all the time. But like, I don't know the answer to this question. I'm like deeply motivated to find it out. But I find it absolutely fascinating that and in no uncertain terms, we have a large amount of data flowing out of the sky. But if we are to get to a place where we really want to be recording as much data as we're talking about, there will be a need for more constellations. But the biggest need right now is for those constellations to demonstrate that there is robust revenue in the sale of pixels that can be consumed by non-expert, non-expert environments. So right now, if you sell into US government, you sell into any government, they have teams of geospatial experts. Yeah. You don't have that environment in generic consumer goods company. There isn't a team of geospatial people who can do cool stuff with images. There isn't a team of geospatial people who will do some kind of ad hoc analysis. Those teams don't exist in these commercial markets. So we need to be able to build tools that those teams can consume. So either the satellite companies need to find partners, or they need to commit to actual analytic processes. And both of those avenues make good sense. I would temper enthusiasm around an Earth observation company knowing everything about everything and therefore being able to create analytics for every single scenario. But I don't think it's a bad thing for an Earth observation company to know a lot about something, because then they need to consume their own imagery API and they need to eat their own dog food to some extent. But I do think that building a network of robust partners who understand precision agriculture, or who understand parametric insurance, or who understand, consumer goods asset monitoring for ESG, all those things are very similar on one level, but also nuanced and different, certainly around the sales and marketing of the actual product, and probably different around the packaging of the end product. So like from a geospatial guy, I'm like, that's all the same stuff. Like, who cares? But actually, from a consumer perspective, they're totally different products. And for an individual in consumer goods land to say, I need to do ESG, I need to do asset tracking, like who shall I engage with? Well, they're not going to necessarily type in geospatial Earth observation remote sensing company. They're going to say consumer goods ESG asset tracking, which are totally different keywords. So if you're going to like try and tune your sales and marketing to certain environments, you really need to be thinking about that stuff.
Sure. So I'm sorry, I got another provocative question. Aren't you just building the case? You said SparkGeo is not public, but aren't you, in the context of us possibly describing the reason why all these Earth observation SPACs have crashed, describing a gap in the market that a company like SparkGeo might be able to convince some investors that it could fill? And therefore, maybe is there a path for you possibly aiming to go public at some point and let the public benefit from your rise?
Yeah. Oh, that's a
you can tell I care about the public. This is about the little guy. This podcast.
You're a man of the people. So am I willing to put my money where my mouth is? Is that what you're asking?
I'm just saying. I just feel like this is all basically saying it's a company like SparkGeo or another analytics firm that understands how to do geostatistics.
Sure.
And convert these intensity values within these pixels into meaning for just as statistically adept clients, such as actuaries, who maybe focus their mathematical talents on a domain that's relevant to insurance. Anyway.
Because you're absolutely right. In no uncertain terms, it's like insurance companies are deeply data literate. It's just not necessarily true that they understand the geospatial data environment, which is probably less it's probably more subject to error than or complexity, shall we say, than maybe sort of typical data sources. So yes, so I would also say that there's value in deep domain expertise, and our domain expertise is in geospatial. So the problem with that situation is that sometimes people want geospatial, but it's kind of nichey. The perfect situation would be a partnership between a company like ours and a company that has deep domain expertise in the value creation vertical. So like we don't know that much about insurance. If I talk to someone and they say this is what I need, I can build them what they need. But if we were to engage with an insurance company, that would be great. If we were to engage with a precision agriculture company, that would be great. Like that's how that would need to work, because I don't think that we own that domain expertise, and we certainly don't own the sales and marketing, any of those environments. However, like who knows what's going to happen next month? Like everything changes all the time. What I've learned about business is as soon as you say something, you get challenged with being a liar almost immediately. Because I used to say SparkGeo would never do any government work, and it's like simply not true anymore. It's like we do some government work now, and it's not necessarily because we sought it out. It's because it came to us. We're like, oh well, actually, why would we say no to this? This is crazy. This is actually really interesting stuff. So like I'm constantly challenged, and the great thing about being a small company and not being publicly traded is that we can live with that ambiguity a little bit, and that's all good. As soon as you enter the public realm, you really have to be deeply focused and be able to follow through. And that's not to say that we don't follow through. It's that we're like constantly course correcting, which is neat for us, and we can do that very conveniently. And I don't think we're anywhere near big enough to warrant.
I guess I guess it's also more about the general topic of maybe others who have an entrepreneurial bent, who are familiar with geospatial, perhaps this identification of some of the reasons why these EO SPACs have crashed helps to focus attention on what investors might want to get behind to fill the gap that other investors in these EO SPACs are saying is not being filled by these companies. If that's not too inarticulate of a way to put it.
Yeah, I mean, I believe that the amount of data flowing out of low Earth orbit is a tremendous opportunity. We've never seen this much data flow out of space before. Like never seen that much data. And I believe that cloud computing has got us to a place where that data, it's much less expensive than it was to use. And cloud compute means that you can access adequate computing resources to do big things relatively easily. So those two things mean that, like, and in no uncertain terms, those two things didn't exist 10 years ago. Like, this is a new market, a new opportunity. So with new markets, new opportunities come the need to educate and to innovate. And innovation used to be very, very expensive for Earth observation. Now, our friends at Planet, who seem to be doing incredibly well in terms of their earnings, but again, are getting completely punished by the market. And that I don't understand. Like, they actually have good revenue, and they're making good announcements, and they're buying companies. They're doing, in air quotes, what they should be doing. But again, the market doesn't seem to like them right now. I still think that we need ESG to sort of like either happen or not happen. And it's like right now, it's like a big question mark. And the big question mark is, I think, in the same way that having unsteady legislation, having a question mark in there means that people they see it in a higher risk, a higher risk column. So if we understood more about how the market will have to react to ESG, then, and like ESG is really interesting because even before we get to the Earth observation stuff, I would argue that most large corporate organizations do not know where all their buildings are. Like, I don't think it's true that every large organization knows where its stuff is. So, like, the first question to answer is, where's my stuff? And it's another geospatial question. Like, it's maps. And then once you know where your stuff is, and then you start realizing like quite how at risk, like all my warehouses are right up by the sea. This is really dangerous. Why did we do that? Oh, it's cheaper. Oh, well, this is, and you have suddenly have these internal discussions around, oh my word, like half of our assets are at some major climate risk and we're going to get punished by our ESG filings as a result of this. This is a bit of a problem. What we're going to do. That whole thing becomes really interesting. And so you have this notion of climate risk of assets and climate risk on assets. And you've got two ends of the story, both of which actually are deeply geographic. And then both of those questions can somewhat be addressed by Earth observation, but you still need this piece in the middle of like, where is my stuff? Which is not so much Earth observation as it is like a general like geographic information project.
Well, asset management type thing. All right,
but, so or even asset discovery. Yeah,
sure,
I mean,
okay, so yes, we need to discover the assets, and then once you realize the value of them and how many you have, put them in some sort of asset register, blah blah blah. Yes, okay. So to summarize, there's been a crash in one of the hottest sections of the market. Some of the darlings of our industry are down up to 80%. I think Virgin Orbital down 90+%, about to go bankrupt. So a lot of fireworks, and the types of reasons you're talking about are lack of geostatistical processing knowledge by some of the clients. They might get a bunch of raster data, but they don't know how to turn it into meaning that relates to their particular vertical. What else? There's like a latent market waiting for a firming up of government legislation around ESG. And what else? Another one you mentioned was that there's essentially an absolute flood of data coming down from space. And you talked about using cloud computing and storage, but also you flagged AI as a way to increase our capacity to process it and derive meaning from it. So to me, it sounds like if there's maybe an AI first startup for processing this data could be a useful one.
I believe so, and I also believe, I think from a geospatial index perspective, looking for vertically focused analytics companies that can robustly access a pipeline of imagery. I think that's really interesting. So you see a few of them in the precision ag space, but seeing it, I would love to see more emerge around different market verticals. We're seeing more emerge around insurance. So Arturo.ai is one. They're not using necessarily satellite remote sensing, but they are using remote sensing for sure to build metrics around property insurance values. So there's one. But then thinking about how other organizations might use Earth observation in a relatively inexpensive way to create value. I think those are the really interesting questions. And I do think we'll also see some innovation around business models for the Earth observation companies. How does analytics company reduce their risk to use a data stream in a robust manner to create an innovative new data product without losing your shirt through experimentation. So like there's some interesting, there's some good questions in there. Because there's a lot of risk on both ends.
I feel like you've given me a crash course in how to start up these kind of businesses and what risk to, this is
I mean, we think about this stuff frequently. So I mean, and I think there's some really robust businesses out there. Like whenever you see someone on the road with like a, you know, used to see people with a checklist on the road, a clipboard taking notes on something. Whenever you see someone doing some kind of field work, it's probably a remote sensing solution to that. So yes. Thinking about that, and like, so in natural resources, there's tons of those use cases. But also in sort of commercial land, I still think there's good use cases to remote sensing, and you have to think about those use cases deeply and make sure that there aren't alternative and better solutions. We don't just want to, we've got all this solution, we're just not sure of the problem. And sometimes we shoehorn remote sensing into the solution when it just doesn't make any sense at all. So we're like, for a long time, we talked about doing car counting outside stores as a
the
surrogate.
Classic one of how full the car park is and all of that.
Yeah, but then why wouldn't you just buy the credit card data? Like, it's way better. It's like, it's the credit card data. It's the actual data you want to know, rather than this kind of surrogate number.
A proxy for it,
Yeah, like, don't build a proxy using remote sensing if there's another way of accessing that data that is just like so much better. That like, why would you, like, you can count cars if you want to know things like automotive supply chain, then count cars. That makes a lot of sense, yeah? But don't count cars if you want to figure out how many people are going to the mall, because half of those people might just be going for a walk around the mall and not spending any money at all. Like, or they might be parking there to go work somewhere else, you know, because it's a convenient free parking lot. Or like, who knows? Like, there's so many other, like, the funny thing about geography and geospatial is that you realize humans are just weird, and half of the stuff you're trying to figure out is weird human behaviors.
You're starting to talk about behavior.
Yeah, well, that's what we're measuring.
My first degree was actually psychology.
Now we're in trouble.
I used to run a behavioral investing podcast, trying to sort of combine the two. But I feel like maybe there is scope. I feel like there's basically what I should turn this into is a podcast about AI and geospatial. It keeps coming up. But maybe, behavioral topics. So I realize we're kind of already at time, but maybe we can leave it there. Although I was interested in, I think a lot of people, when they see you on Twitter, you've got this massive long pinned thread. And it gets into some philosophical matters. And I'm also interested in, I feel like we should have an interest in, philosophy of geospatial.
Sure.
I don't know if you're willing to reflect a bit on what you're trying to get across there.
Well, so geospatial, I think what I wanted to get across there is that geospatial has changed overtly from even when I started SparkGeo in 2010. Like, the cloud was kind of a new thing. I think Planet had just started, Mapbox had just started, Google Maps had just created its first map. And at that point, it might even have just been North America. I can't remember. Like, this is like in North America. I'm originally from the UK. North America, you'd say this is back in the day. This is like a long time. This is like a long time ago, but it was only 13 years. So it's really interesting to think that. And then if you think about all like the major kind of complementary assets around this geospatial kind of area, you have smart space. So you've got like, SpaceX makes things cheap to launch. Like, net result is we've got a ton of data. Oh, that's interesting. We've got GPSs in every single phone. That like literally only just started 10 years ago. And now we've got LiDAR on phones. That's crazy. LiDAR, typically in geospatial land is seen as expensive and heavy data, but now it's in the hands of literally every single person on the planet. They want to buy a fancy new phone. And so in 3 years, it literally will be in the hands of every single person on the planet. That's a new thing. Yeah. We got this kind of
reality capture.
Yeah, exactly. So we got this AI going on. Like 2010, AI was like, I don't know, like it was like a science project. It wasn't really a thing. Now we're touching AI literally, 4 or 5 times a day, whether we know it or not. And then we've got open standards and open source, open source code and open data. That didn't really exist then. Well, open source code did, and open standards did, and open data did, but not in the same level of intensity or volume that it does now. So you've got all these complementary, and then there's the cloud, which is was there, but it wasn't really in any meaningful way. And if you imagine all these, like the Venn diagram of all those things have grown so that they all overlap. Like, and independently of geospatial, all these new assets have emerged. So we can do like fundamentally new things now that were impossible in 2010. Like fundamentally, our range of capabilities have changed. So why are we still doing the what is GIS talk? When was the last time you did what is GIS?
Oh God, I mean, I'm constantly on tour to all the disciplines saying this is what we do. And then being accused basically of being a glorified draftsperson.
Is it like, so I don't understand that at all. It's just crazy. We live in this place where we've got these incredible capabilities. And people like fluctuate. Like there's this massive pendulum swing between people who think we're like basically like super secret squirrel people who can like monitor everything all the time, everywhere, in like this James Bond world. And then people who have never heard of us and have no idea what we do at all. And it's like, well, there's a big spectrum in between these two extremes. We should attempt to be at least somewhere close to reality in here. And I think the reality is almost swinging more towards James Bond now than it is towards the other side, but no one knows it. So what's wrong with our community that sort of doesn't identify the amazing? I tell you that this ability to create analytics, like some people in the industry call it this downstream ability. That's exactly the piece that's missing in the Earth observation value chain. And so that is the piece that we're talking about here. It's like, oh, how do we get from pixels to products? That's like there's a little gap. We've got all these pixels and we've got all this demand, and there's this little bit in the middle where we just haven't figured out how to go from here to there. And that's there's, I bet you there's 100 different use cases in there, and I bet you there's 100 companies that need to be started and need to be built, and each of which will be super valuable, and they'll be super valuable to the Earth observation sector, super valuable to their market verticals, which they'll understand. I mean, like there'll be some weird and wonderful business case for like moving van people or storage containers, or like the weirdest wonderful like stuff, or like milk farmers will care about one thing, and they'll be able to build an analytics.
Of grass, that produces the flavor of milk. That
like golf people will care about something in that value chain. Like there'll be something in there for everybody, but we just need to figure it out and make it easy to create those bridges, and then we're off to the races. And also, I think you'll see those SPAC companies just skyrocket, because they'll be selling a gazillion pixels to a gazillion different companies for a gazillion different use cases, and they'll be the de facto like scalable data source. But we need to bridge, and without that bridge, Earth observation tanks, and we don't get to sort of live our kind of futuristic AI life. But like we need companies to take a risk on that bridge, and I think that's a really interesting place to be, and I think that's exactly where geospatial is right now. It's super unstructured. Where there's a lot of opportunity. There's a ton of risk. I would also say that, and that's why I think this notion of consolidation this year, I don't think it's an unreasonable sort of assessment. As you said, the value of those companies based on stock prices has decreased a lot. There's some bargains to be had. If you're in the private equity guy, you've got 500 million to burn. There's a couple of good bargains.
You know what happened to Amazon in 2000? They dropped 98%. Yeah, and that was the best time to buy them. So yeah. Anyway, I feel like that was an incredible summary and an inspiring new direction for looking at our industry and the kinds of companies to focus on from within our universe of 167 geospatial firms on 23 stock exchanges around the world. So yeah, appreciate you focusing us a bit, Will. It was a privilege.
Well, it's wonderful to be involved, Will. Thanks very much for the opportunity.